everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Art of Being You. And again, with this series that we're going to be doing with relationships, like I mentioned, we're going to be bringing in the male perspective as well, which I think for a lot of us women, we kind of want to know. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about resentment in relationships. And I know, especially during COVID, this has been a big one in a lot of relationships because the downtime that people have had has really impacted and highlighted what has been there all along. I feel when the schedules are so busy and there's like children involved and work and working late hours, and you don't really get the chance to just stop and really think about what is happening in the relationship. So this has come up recently, and it's not a comfortable topic to discuss, but I think it's so important to talk about it in the relationships. So one thing that we're going to go into, and I think it's really important, is what it actually means, right? So one of the things that when I was looking it up, to give it like the best definition, is it's unspoken anger or unspoken shame that you feel in a relationship. And that is something that for a lot of us, it all goes back to communication, right? I want to hear my husband's perspective on this, just to get an idea of what men think about this, because I know it kind of boils, a lot of it is like, oh, the women, they're not speaking up. Well, she didn't say anything. And so I just wanted to get your perspective on, what do you feel? What is it? What are your thoughts in regards to resentment in relationships? What does it mean to you?
Hello, the Art of Being You podcast, our second episode together. So in terms of resentment, I think a lot of it comes down to suppressed emotions that fester for quite a long time and then come out in a way that doesn't actually represent the emotions. You have a frustration, or you have an anger that has built up, or we're using the term resentment today, that's built up over time. And it can come out in such a manner like, no, you can't go out with the boys tonight, or no, you can't go to that football match, or no, you've been working too many hours, why can't you make time for me? The communication isn't that the person doesn't like you doing those things. It's just they're trying to take control of the situation because they've got a frustration around the wider state of the relationship, maybe.
I definitely think you are correct on that, where it's the control piece, where when you haven't communicated it clearly what's going on, it's all the little things that get piled up. And I know for me, it has been one of the bigger things to kind of deal with in any relationship, as a matter of fact. And this is not just in this relationship, obviously. When I think back, in previous relationships. And so my question to you is, in previous relationships, have you had any difficulty? Because I don't know, it's very interesting to me because I don't really hear men complaining too much about it. And I know for women, they are, it is an issue. At least I find myself in many of the relationships that I didn't want to communicate the issue or the frustration with the guy, because all I felt was, I'm going to be the nagging partner. And I think for a lot of women, that's why they hold back. Like, they're like, oh, I don't want to be labeled as a nagging whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, all this resentment starts, where it starts by one little thing, and then it just kind of piles up. And then it gets to that point where you're just like, I'm done, like, I'm fed up, and you explode. And, that's the part that I think, as far as for women, I know I hate confrontation. Like, I myself personally. And so it's even harder for me to talk to somebody about something that's been bothering me about them, because I would rather just swallow it and like keep on going on with life and just kind of keep the peace and not rock the boat. But at the end of the day, it's my voice is not being heard. Like my feelings are not being addressed. My emotions are not being let out. And so the buildup of that, then it turns into like this massive explosion. And so I've had to learn to catch myself. And I think you were really good at that, where when I did have my moments of explosion, you kind of made me aware of it, where you said, well, wait a minute, when did this start? And why didn't you tell me anything about it? And so that's something that when I think back for a relationship, I do feel that the person has to feel safety. I need to feel safe with my emotions and my feelings when I'm speaking to you. Because if I've tried to and you've kind of dismissed it, or you haven't really put attention to it, then it doesn't feel right to just open up and like say, well, I told you 10 times already, because the person may not necessarily be truly listening to what the other person is saying or feeling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned us in terms of our experiences and my communication with you, but I think that comes from an awareness of your message. And when you would get frustrated with me, for example, say when we first moved to Dubai, and you were annoyed, say I'd gone out too much or something. You actually weren't annoyed I'd gone out too much. You were frustrated that you'd moved country and you were lacking the network and the power that you had in LA here, and you were taking your time to re-establish that. And I could see there was a frustration, but it wasn't necessarily what you were shouting at me was the symptom. It wasn't the underlying problem. So I guess it's having someone or having the patience not to just react. Because if I just react and start shouting at you, why do you want to behave like this? Then we don't get anywhere, and we don't get to the bottom of solving the actual problem or anything. So I think that for us, it was important to actually listen to the person and what they were really trying to communicate in a moment when they were so frustrated they weren't actually able to get the correct words they were trying to find out. That's probably been the most important lesson to me, and that we clearly didn't always get it right. So.
But what about men though? Like men in general. I mean, you have a bunch of friends. You guys talk. Is there ever a point where you hear about like men having resentment with their partners?
Yeah, I think yes, clearly. No relationship is perfect, and every relationship is always a work in progress. So, for example, just thinking, aware of situations like, where say the girlfriend has got dressed up, gone out once a week with the girls every week, and didn't make much effort with her partner. Now, the partner's communication then is to show frustration and say, well, I don't like you going out with the girls. The reality was he didn't like the fact that she wasn't making any effort for him, and she was making an effort for the girls. But then that just spiraled into a game of trying to control. So the male in the situation is frustrated, doesn't know how to communicate that necessarily, and therefore tries to control the bit that's upsetting him. And the bit that's upsetting him is that she's getting dressed up, or the bit that he thinks is upsetting him is she's getting dressed up to go out to the girls. He associates that with her caring more what she looks like for them, and not really caring so much for him, which he then maybe hurts the ego or pulls on some insecurities that he has, and that then compounds the situation, and he has further frustration and resentment. So the next time she goes out, it's an even bigger argument, and so on and so forth. But he didn't know, or he wasn't aware that the thing that was hurting his feelings or building up the resentment was the fact that he just wanted her to make a little bit more effort with him, and she could go out every day of the week. It wasn't the going out that was the problem. So that, yeah, for sure, there's, many, it's not just something that sits with the female side of the relationship at all, but it's communicated differently, I think.
Okay, so now that we're talking about all this, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are like, is it really resentment or I'm just angry with him? Like I think really understanding the labeling of what the situation is really, really important. So there was an article that I had read, and it was 7 signs of resentment that show up in a relationship. And the first one is unresolved arguments, which obviously is just probably the strongest one that I would think, because it's so easy. Like when you ask people for advice for your marriage and they're like, oh, don't go to sleep, upset at each other. And when you have that unresolved argument, for a fact it's gonna come up at another point. Like it didn't go away. And I think a lot of people, when the other person doesn't bring it up again, they're kind of like, oh, well, that's gone now, right? But then when it shows up again in a situation, that emotion gets triggered again. And so then it becomes this huge, big thing. And, the example that I, sometimes use when I'm handling clients, it's simple. Like, for example, when you've asked, the partner to throw out the trash 10 times, and then they finally, like on the 11th time, you just absolutely blow up. And again, you're right. It's not about throwing the trash in. It's you're not respecting me. You're not listening to me. And so it goes back one step. And so I think for a lot of us that are in a relationship or are thinking about getting into a relationship, these are the kinds of things that I think are really important for the relationship to be healthy. So the second one, I'm going to let you take this one over.
Just on the unresolved arguments, it's also very important to understand what the argument is, because you can't resolve something until you get to the bottom of it. So the reason it may stay unresolved is because you think you've spoke it through, and it gets to a point where one person has moved on because it's dealt with all their emotional stuff, but the other person hasn't had the chance to clear up their bits, and that's why it stays unresolved for one partner. And then you both have resentment. One resented because they think they've moved forward, and the other one resents because
this is true.
The other one resents because they haven't got all of their things resolved that they needed. So the second one is lack of attention. And it kind of goes to what we just spoke about in terms of someone making lots of effort or doing other things, going out and not maybe paying the relationship as much attention as they want. Or maybe you feel uncared for and the other person values their career more, or their friendship group, or their social life and their sporting group, or whatever it might be. Their hobby, they're into music, they go to concerts all the time without their partner. So lack of attention, I guess, is in the way that the partner is spending too much time doing something else and not investing that time into the relationship.
That is that's a really important one. Especially, when I did a list of the ideal partner that I wanted before I met my husband. And one of the biggest things that I realized was that I wanted the partner that I was with to make me a priority in their life, because I didn't want to be chasing somebody for it. And it was, let's just be honest. The dating world in LA is not the best. It is. I do feel that there's just so many options, and people live in different places, that it's so easy for men to think, or women, well, then the next person is there's going to be always a person who looks better, has a better career, whatever it is. And so it's easy to kind of fall into that same cycle of, well, there's somebody else. And so all of this stuff just kind of goes unhandled. Like when you don't know how to handle something like this in a healthy relationship, then, it definitely impacts it. So we're going to move on to the third one, which is overthinking the bad experiences. I remember this one when I did it one time. I think it was because you weren't praying. There was And I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it, because at night I would end up, I grew up with like very in a conservative family, very Catholic. And so I was praying every night, and I wouldn't see you praying. And then it just kind of festered and festered. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, if he doesn't pray, oh my gosh, what if like something bad happens? He's not going to be my soulmate. And it just turned into this massive thing. And it became such a horrible experience that it just blew out of proportion in my head. From something so simple of, he doesn't pray, oh my gosh, like that was it. It was like it's over. And so that's something that I think when we don't talk about it with the other person, it just stays in your mind, and it just like festers, and you don't really get to speak your emotions, your feelings, and address them. There's like this fear of addressing those feelings.
Yeah, I think bad experiences, or in life or anyway, you're going to have bad things happen, and it's how you process them as a person and then move forward from them. And so in the relationship context, if you have an argument or you have an issue that doesn't go resolved, or not doesn't go resolved, but you keep thinking about it, critiquing it, building it up, making it bigger. Normally he brings me a coffee every morning, and my husband didn't do it. Why didn't he do it? Oh my God, he's cheating on me. Like all of a sudden you turn something into, well, actually he was late for a meeting and he was running out the door. He forgot his briefcase and his keys, and it was a nightmare start to the day. The reality and the overthinking sometimes can be a million miles from each other, but that then creates the resentment, and it further compounds things. You worry and worry more. Number 4 is decreased interest in physical intimacy. So you noticed your partner is starting to lose attraction for you, maybe. You can't remember the last time you enjoyed being with your partner. Maybe you've been avoiding it. Maybe you've been avoiding romantic situations, or something like that.
Oh, that's for sure. I think for women, especially, if I'm angry, I want nothing to do with you. Like if I'm holding on to something, it's in the way. Like it's definitely there. And I know I used to do it a lot in relationships where I'm like, nah, because that's the biggest thing, is that anger, that it just festers, that frustration. And it's like the top thing on your mind, like nothing else. It's that thing, and it's just there, even if it's something small, but it does make its way to the priority list on your mind. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I do think that has a big, and that obviously it impacts the relationship, because it starts creating a disconnect in the relationship.
This one's interesting, because I think it can be obviously very different for different people. Some relationships, intimacy might be the biggest driver in it, and might be the thing that connects them. And other relationships, the intimacy might be less, and it might not be such a big thing. So if someone starts to withhold it due to resentment, in some cases that might be a great way to communicate an issue, because it's going to be greatly missed. And in other cases it might go slightly unnoticed, because that's not the thing that has been so important in the foundation of that relationship.
Very, very true. So we move on to number 5. It's criticism. So attacking your partner's character and talking about the flaws and everything that they do wrong. And you know what? I can definitely agree with that one. When you start criticizing them, they're not eating healthy. They keep, they don't put their clothes in the laundry basket, or that criticism of their character. Like, you're always so loud. You're always so this. And it just becomes such a big, big hassle. And I feel the common denominator with all of these, and I know we got 2 more to go, but the common denominator in all of them, I feel, is it starts the disconnect. Like once one kicks in, that's it. Like the seed was planted, it starts creating that disconnect in the relationship, which then allows the resentment to start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. because then it starts kind of festering in there and it grows bigger. The resentment is getting bigger and the relationship is getting disconnected. So they're growing further and further away from each other.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone likes to be criticized, do they? So if you criticize someone straight away, if it's without foundation, you're going to resent the person. And then, but if there's a reason the other person has been criticizing you, they probably have their own frustrations at that point. So they're probably not going to back down. Well, that's my experience. So then the initial bit of criticism isn't going to be taken back. There won't be an apology, and the resentment is going to hang around for a little bit longer. Number 6 is retaliation. So if you felt hurt by your partner, you've got some anger towards them, and you want to take an action back, a revengeful act, to get back at them because you felt emotionally attacked by them. You want to, in some form, attack them back with a retaliation of some sort.
Ooh, that's definitely... I think we all kind of do that sometimes. Sometimes we do it unknowingly. I don't think sometimes you do it on purpose. It's just that, I think when you don't know how to communicate or you don't even know how to address it, that's how it comes out. Like that's your way of handling it, where you consistently retaliate against something and then you realize that it's actually something else, but you can't even put the words into communicating that with your partner.
And that's when, someone can be vindictive or, go back to the example of going out. If your partner wants you to spend more quality time at home and you're annoyed at them, they've hurt you, you might get dressed up to the nines and make a big show of going out. And that's a retaliation because that's going to hurt them back.
Yes.
But as you said on the previous point, all it does is drive a bigger wedge and makes a bigger problem, and you're actually not addressing the core of the issue.
This is true. So we move on to number 7, feelings of regret. Oh my gosh. I think this is a big one for relationships that have, I think when you've done a sacrifice for the partner, whether you've stopped your career to let them, kind of grow theirs, or when you've moved somewhere because they got a job, or, when you start doing stuff like that, it is a sacrifice at the end of the day. I know a lot of people have like an issue with calling it a sacrifice, but it is a sacrifice because one person has to kind of handle all of that for the sake of the relationship. So that's the best thing. It is for the sake of the relationship, but the feelings of regret, even for me, I think at the beginning, the whole moving where I'm like, wait a minute, did I do the right thing? And my frustration came out in that it was actually that feeling of regret, and sometimes even saying things that I shouldn't. And like you said, when you kind of know it's going to get them, like it's going to hurt them a little, it's almost easier to like say it for you to get a reaction out of it. And then you kind of just feel that almost like a little sense of satisfaction where you're like, I got them. But again, it's not healthy. You might feel good in that moment, but when you really think about after all of this that we've talked about, the 7, I think at the end of the day, it is really important to think about what's the point of all this? What is the point of me holding on to this resentment? And one of the things is you cannot have a healthy relationship and it survive when there's resentment in there. I think the resentment brings in a lot of toxicity, and one or the other couple partner can start feeling less confident about themselves, especially if, like it's the partner that is going out and is having fun and then the other one is hurt. You could start creating some damage into, for people. And I think like when you really think the bigger picture here, the fact that you could easily damage somebody in the long run, is it worth it?
Yeah, and I think, so you talk about toxicity in the relationship. If you're not aware, it goes back to the previous episode where we talked about self-awareness. If you're not aware as to why you're carrying out that behavior, you're not going to be able to change it. And the resentment quite possibly could grow. Say you're a very level-headed, shy person, but in the relationship, it's a toxic place, and there's a frustration and resentment that is building and building. You might act out of character. That resentment might drive you to say something really mean in a critical way. You might criticize the way that person dresses, and that, your partner, their identity might be attached to the way they dress. So it could be quite hurtful, and that's not you as a person. You don't intend to be hurtful. You want to get on with people or whatever it might be, but the resentment pushes you to act out of character. And that's quite a big thing in having in a healthy relationship. You have to be congruent. You two different people, very different personalities. More often than not, you have to align somewhere. And if there is resentment in there, it's very, very challenging to get you on the same page so you can live in some sort of harmony.
Yes. So now knowing all of this, do you think that a relationship can survive resentment?
Yes. A relationship can pretty much survive anything if the two people in it choose for it to survive. Does it mean the relationship will be good and healthy? Probably not. I think the relationship, can get through many things if the people are dedicated to it. But does the two people in there, are they making healthy choices? How is that relationship serving them? And what does it look like moving forward? If you continually argue and fight and bicker, is that the best for you?
Yes, I think, and I think you said it, if it's a consistent thing that, they get over an issue and it's just a continuous resentment of something where, sometimes it even becomes a habit. Like you're done being resentful about, let's say the partner always going out, and then it's like once that's fixed, then you end up grabbing onto something else. Well, they're not listening to me enough, or they're not, having conversations with me enough, or they're always on their phone. And I feel like some people can get into a very toxic pattern of just kind of finding another reason to be resentful towards that person instead of just dealing with it. So at the end of the day, as we conclude this episode, one tip for me to share is it's not worth it to carry that resentment. The toxicity that is built in your mind and in your body is horrific. Like the damage that it could really do physically to somebody is really, really terrible. And so I think outweighing it, like, is it worth it for me? Yes, I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and I have to be vulnerable with this person in this moment right now, but I'd rather just do it now and then see how that person reacts. If people are dating, I think this is a big one where you have to figure out how you're communicating and how the other person handles it. Because when you bring up something that you're really feeling and you're being vulnerable about and you don't feel safe, and whether they dismiss it, they play it small, or they kind of joke about it, it's very difficult for somebody to open up again and talk about it. So it's being fully aware of how do you handle, or are you the person that handles that resentment and just like runs with it and you're going to hang on to it for dear life? So I do think being able to communicate with your partner about something that is bothering you, something that's frustrating you, something that makes you angry, then I think you can kind of get an idea of how the relationship is going to handle things moving forward.
Yeah, and I think as well, you touched on it where you said deal with one thing and deal with it early. So a lot of these things can be layered. So if I'm getting a lack of attention, then I might start to criticize you. And if I start to criticize you, you might start to retaliate against me. And then as you retaliate against me, I have feelings of regret, because these things have layered and layered and layered. So my view on it would be separate the issues. It starts with a lack of attention. Well, let's discuss that. Where does that come from? Let's take ownership of it. Whose feelings are being hurt? How are they being hurt? Why? Where's the resentment building from? Let's try and address that. And then once you've dealt with that, it's trying to disassociate that with the other pieces and deal with everything individually, so it doesn't become a huge mess, because then all of a sudden your whole identity of your relationship is an argument. Well, you do this, that upsets me here, and I don't like you behaving like that. But actually the main issue is you just didn't make enough effort to do a date night once a week or once a month, whatever, to make the relationship feel like a priority, which could have stopped us layering all this resentment on top of each other, where we now don't have a solution because it's all too overwhelming.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I got married to this man. That is awesome. That was really good, by the way. That was a really good tip, because it is that. And I think for others to see it, it's interesting that it came from you. And I'm curious to see how men take it, because I think if a woman says that, they're just kind of like, oh gosh, here she goes again. But when you hear it from a man, like, it feels a little bit different. I think men are more open to hearing it, like, oh yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that. But you're absolutely right. And I think, hopefully this gets to shine some light for some of the relationships out there, especially during this time, that it's not easy. And having these conversations with your partners, it's not easy, but it's so necessary. And it's for the sake of a healthy relationship that this is needed. So thank you guys so much. And we will get to see you guys on the next episode.
Thank you.
Have a good one, guys. Take care.